if I try and think about 5 years from now, I would say yes, that UX as we know it today will be radically changed. Things that deal with rote tasks are definitely going to be something of the domain of AI in the future. Designers, I think, the space that we work in is around intuition, empathy, emotion, and that's much, much harder for AI. It's a scary time for everyone, right? Like everybody's a little nervous. But the reality is that a lot of what we do already is still very valuable in this future world that's already here.
Hi, I'm Mike Green, and welcome to Understanding Users, the podcast where I chat candidly with UX design and research professionals from around the world to hear about how they build digital products and services in a user-centered way.
Hi, Mike. It's good to see you again. I'm Chris Reardon, formerly the head of responsible AI at Meta, and I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Great to have you back on, Chris, and thanks for taking the time. Last time when we were discussing, AI, we had this fascinating chat around kind of the impact of AI on design as a discipline. But what I wanted to chat about with you now is really the kind of impact on careers. So, in particular, how can new entrants into this field, or people who want to, existing designers and researchers who want to upskill, shall we say, in AI, how can they go about that? Where would you begin in terms of giving them advice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think really you kind of have to look at it from a few different angles. One is if the designer wants to actually design AI products, like what does their kind of career roadmap look like, and then just other designers who are going to be impacted by the new tools that AI brings to those disciplines, right? So you might not be interested in designing AI products, but you're still a fashion designer or an architect. And what are the new kinds of AI tech that are coming, and how is that going to kind of change and augment your role, as we move forward and they become more prevalent? So in the first sort of scenario, I think design is obviously very different in AI because you're not so much interested in the end UX UI of the product. You're more interested in the intelligence inside the product. So you're really sort of focused on this, digital brain, if you will. And how does that think? How does it work? What are the expectations of how it performs? And much like you do with a typical standard app, you do research, you find out what the pain points are of the end users and so on, and you kind of feed those back into those expectations. The difference between an intelligent system and a standard app is a standard app is typically built through a design system, right? You come up with a grid and typography and buttons and components and patterns and so on. And those are typically pretty static unless you obviously intentionally manually change them. With AI is fluid. It moves, contextually and changes its approach depending on what the user is asking of it. If I'm thinking about large language models, for example, so you can't stamp on that a style guide system. It's thinking, it's changing, it's dynamic, it's contextual. So the way to kind of influence how that works is through frameworks and guidelines of a different kind, principles, values, writing up what human values you want the AI to engender, so that depending on different kinds of scenarios, it behaves in a way that you think is kind of ethically and morally sound, right? One of the examples is one of the reasons why I came to Meta. I was getting recommendations on Facebook that were about an incident that had happened in my life that was quite traumatic. And there was no way for me to control those recommendations. And eventually they got wind of, it wasn't just me, obviously, it was a lot of people were having this issue. And they finally started to include buttons on the UI that you could kind of turn off this memory and stop seeing it, and kind of flag it as something as, not being celebrated, something that you wanted to celebrate. And I think the AI itself, if AI, becomes more forward in the UX experience, it will have to make those decisions at scale. Or, conversely, the user has to be able to give it back advice saying, please stop sharing that thing, and it has to understand what you're saying and kind of flag it that way. And so that's a different kind of approach than the kind of style guide, old school way of doing it. When you design those frameworks, you really want a lot of different perspectives from different communities to kind of advise on that. You're not designing for your design team. You're not designing really for your end user. You're designing for society, which is much more broad than that. And one or two or 100 or even 1,000, even 10,000 users is not enough, right? So even if you were to get enough research for 10,000 users, that's not enough information to really design for the rest of the world. There's, close to 8 billion people. So what happens is you actually need proxies in the room who advocate on behalf of those users. Regulators, civil and human rights experts, and so on, often have more clarity around the issues involved in AI, and they'll be able to speak better for the user than the user can for themselves. Right? They're aware of regulation. They're aware of different kinds of harms, and so they know how to touch on those hot topics quickly and work efficiently with product teams to kind of make sure that they don't overstep the bounds. So it becomes more of an ecosystem of stakeholders that you're working with rather than just the end users. Just focusing on the end user is not enough. The other side of it too is the business owner, so shareholders, if you will, anyone who's interested in the business making money or growing is also a stakeholder. And if you don't start to think of them as just as important as the end users, you're not going to go very far. It's actually really important to make sure that the business is aligned with what you're doing in the product, because if there's a mismatch there, you're always going to be in conflict, and you're never going to actually be able to deliver an ethical solution that really covers all the bases to the expectations of society. So there's a compromise there that has to be figured out, and I think the role of the designer is to kind of help facilitate those kinds of discussions.
That's really interesting, and I'd want to pick up on the kind of the role of the ethicist that we talked about before in just a second. But going back to the designer, kind of what you're saying is, because of the nature of AI products, it's less about what it looks like, but it's more about what's going on under the hood. So, for example, ChatGPT's interface is fairly basic, but that doesn't really matter, because what you're interested in is what is the text that it's generating. So, actually, does that then mean that the sort of UI UX designers are less important in this kind of new world? That actually it's the the people that are involved in creating the algorithm, the sort of development side, that is preeminent. Is that fair to say?
I think that's too early to call right now. But if I try and think about 5 years from now, I would say yes, that UX as we know it today will be radically changed. I do think, just talking about ChatGPT for a second, there's a lot of improvements that they could do to that UI that would make it more trustworthy, right? So, the delusions that we see in ChatGPT could be addressed in the UI, where it could flag, its confidence rating around certain things that it's sharing with you. So that could help already guide you that it's, some of the citations and links and things that it's put into the content that it's sharing with you are not factual at all, or suspect. So there's definitely ways to make how it creates what it's creating and sharing with you more transparent, to give you sort of clarity on what's going on behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, if you think sort of this is already happening. So there's several AI companies that are already building AIs that build mobile applications, right? So you just tell it what you want, and immediately you get a functioning prototype. It's not even just screen designs, flat screen designs. It's actually functioning, and it can build the whole stack. And I think that is going to be the speed that area is changing in. Is obviously every product team in the world would benefit from that, and so you're going to see the acceleration of that. It's going to be crazy. In a year, I'd say we're going to have if not already, we're going to have plugins for Figma that manage our style guide systems and can, textually build mobile prototypes just from prompts.
So that would kind of alarm me if I suppose in some ways, if I was a UX designer or starting out in a UX design career with a research hat on as a researcher, kind of what's your view on that? Because be that, this very clever systems, as you say, can create their own UIs, etc. But the human element of kind of how, what the answers are that come back and how those answers are interpreted by human beings and kind of what the ethics of that are, there's still an element of need for human. I guess, are we all endangered as researchers as well, is my question.
Well, I mean, this is definitely a whole podcast unto itself for sure. But if you think about how many man hours go into iterating on a mobile app, right? If you could cut that by 50% or 80%, you can spend a lot more time thinking about the why. Why are we doing this app in the first place? And you can get to deeper insights and spend more time on the actual research and less time on the execution. And so, therefore, you know, hopefully the product quality should raise up because you're not moving pixels around, you're not creating radiuses on buttons, you're not deciding between Arial bold and italics, right? Those sorts of things are frankly, not as valuable as how should an intelligent system really think in X, Y, and Z scenarios. So I think when you talk about design, I think design is actually going to have to go through a bit of a renaissance in the sense of um, understanding its true value, right? Its true value is really making sure that what we're designing works really, really well for people. And that's not going to change. I do think even if, I could push a button today and get 20, immediately get 20 versions of a prototype that function in front of me and I can test them. So just think of how quickly we can narrow down to the right one or two. Um, and get that in front of users and move more quickly and really co-create with users, right? Why not hand the prompt tool to the user and say, you tell me what you think it should be, right? So I think we're going to get much closer to more nuanced problems with these technologies because we're not fumbling around in pixel grids, right? It's the important part is really the connection with the user and the stakeholders and the other people I kind of mentioned previously.
And going on then, or going back rather to the career aspect of this. So if I was, let's say I'm a 17, 18-year-old choosing my A levels, if it's here in the UK or whatever the equivalent is in the US, or thinking about a university degree potentially or some kind of path of study for my career, if I think, whoa, I want to get into AI, it sounds fascinating. What would you recommend for me?
Well, I think things that deal with rote tasks are definitely going to be something of the domain of AI in the future, right? So if you're trying to learn something from a book and just retain information just for recall purposes, I don't think that career path is going to be very solid in the next 5 years. I worked on natural language assistants. The goal will be to take any kind of role in the world, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, whatever the role, where huge amounts of data already exist, and turn those into AI assistants, right? So where it's a recall on fact-based or recorded information, that's going to be the domain of the AI. Designers, I think, the space that we work in is around intuition, empathy, emotion, and that's much, much harder for AI to cover up on. So, I think we're safe in the creative space to the degree that we'll get tools that help augment and power us up and make us more efficient, but they're not going to be able to replace that kind of intuition that we have. In terms of skills, I'd say learning things around ethics and policy as well, regulation, negotiation, compromise, workshops, understanding. Research is definitely critical. So any designer needs to have a really, really strong foundation in research methodologies. And I think that's going to be this, ongoing. Now there are going to be new roles or evolving roles. So we already have service designers, but I think they're going to become specialized service designers that design, AI workflows for engineers and data scientists. But they're also going to work on the other side of the fence as well for the user, and they're going to that kind of mentality is more like a conversation designer, where you're trying to think through the sort of random, you know, directions that a conversation can go in, and pinpoint areas where AI can actually take action against those conversations. So you're connecting it to databases and automation platforms so that the AI, when you're chatting to GPT powered tools, they can actually do things for you, not just give you content. So that kind of thinking through that, if you will, supply chain of touch points is going to be more complicated. But having systems thinking, so it's rather systems thinking than systems, using design systems. That's the flip here.
Yeah, yeah. And what about people further into their career? So let's say mid-career designers, researchers, service designers who want to make a career pivot into AI. What kinds of roles are there at the moment, or what should they be looking out for? Kind of how could they get into organizations offering that opportunity?
Yeah, no, I think it's a scary time for everyone, right? Like everybody's a little nervous, but the reality is that a lot of what we do already is still very valuable in this future world that's already here. Workshopping, strategic thinking, designing sprints, and those kinds of things are all still very important. But it's just that you're having to broaden who's included in those things. You're not just doing it with the design team anymore. You might be doing it with outside experts, or you might be doing it with outside representatives of lots of different communities to make sure that you're designing well for them. So I'm not saying that you suddenly have to go out and get a diploma in something new, because frankly, there's not stuff out there that's proven yet to help in this space, right? But there are lots of great resources. Google has a fantastic you know AI 101 training thing on their website. IBM has some fantastic stuff, as does Microsoft. So there's plenty of spaces where you can kind of grasp the topics and learn the definitions and things like that to kind of become familiar. Um, it's still an evolving space.
And let's talk about the ethicists now, because this is a really key thing, and you've mentioned this quite a few times. So, what will, in your opinion, will every team have an ethicist, need an ethicist, and if so, kind of, or even if not, what will their role be? How will they, what will they be doing in this new world?
So if the person I used to work with at Meta, who's the chief ethicist, were in the room, I think she would agree with me, is that the goal is actually to make everybody an ethicist, right? Or at least have a very strong appreciation for ethical thinking. Everybody's born with their own kind of innate ethical framework inside them, and really it's trying to, most people go about their lives not really thinking about that too much, and really what it is about being intentional like a designer would, and kind of trying to articulate that and get it down on paper and get everybody to agree that these are the ethical things that we hope to have in our products, right? And so it really is just, again, the designer facilitating those conversations, but everybody in the room should have that inside them as they're working on what they're doing. And I don't think that people don't. I think that they just don't articulate it well, right? And so you might think as an engineer that you're coding something that's going to benefit the world, but and it may do on the surface. But if you have something sitting next to your laptop that's, here's a kind of 5 bullet points of something to help me think about this, that, help me interrogate my work to make sure that I'm representing those marginalized communities that we often, are often left behind by the world, right? How do we make sure that we prime ourselves every time we go to our laptops to do work, that, maybe there's a 2-minute ritual when you sit down at your desk every day, that you just kind of prime yourself on, I'm going to try and do the best I can today, and here's some of the things that I'm going to think about as I go through my day. And the more that we can do that, the more I think we'll have a positive impact on the work that comes out the other end.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Understanding Users. If you enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share this episode more widely. And feel free, of course, to drop me a line with any feedback via LinkedIn or my website, researchable.uk. Join me again next time when I'll be sharing some more insights from digital design professionals. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.